Hello and welcome to Dan Explains. My name is Dan. More hurricanes, droughts, floods, and wildfires. Whether you believe in global warming or not, you're probably asking yourself how it could ever be a good thing, considering all the bad consequences that are put out in front of our faces every day on the internet and TV. You may remember a few years ago when a memo was leaked that showed large oil companies knew that burning fossil fuels could cause global warming as far back as the 1960s. And the odd thing is, the memo seemed to cast global warming in a positive light. Let me explain why. So, first off, I'd like to give a little disclaimer. What I'm about to explain is conjecture based on other people's theories. I'll try to link all my sources in the description. Secondly, I'm specifically talking about global warming here, not climate change in general. Global warming is a type of climate change, but climate change isn't always global warming. Just like a cat is an animal, but not all animals are cats. You hear a lot of bad things about global warming, and yes, on its face, while it's happening, it's not good. However, at the end of the last ice age, about 10 to 15,000 years ago, wait. We're actually still in that ice age. That was just the last glacial period. We're just in something called an interglacial period during an ice age. So, we're in a slightly warmer period during an ice age that has been going on for 2 million years. Just for clarification, an ice age is defined as a period where there are large areas on Earth that have glaciers year-round. What was the Earth's climate 2 million years ago? Well, much warmer than it is today. Anyway, at the end of the last glacial period, the Earth warmed very rapidly. It was global warming. The temperature jumped 10 degrees Celsius, that's over 15 degrees Fahrenheit, in Greenland. There was a sudden reversal to colder temperatures called the Younger Dryas period. However, I'm not going to cover that in detail in this video. But that reversed again with another rapid warm-up. These warm-ups and the Younger Dryas cool-down happened rapidly in a period of just decades. The sea levels rose to even higher levels than they are today. This obviously displaced people, given there weren't many cities back then, and the ones that we knew did exist, like Jericho, were inland. Then again, coastal ones would be underwater now, making them harder to find. It was not long after these events that the agricultural revolution began about 10,000 years ago. And what's the Middle East today? Big surprise, huh? So, for Stone Age people, the temporary effects of global warming were bad, but the long-term effects were good. Something interesting happened after the agricultural revolution began. What's that? The Earth stayed warm. Since the beginning of the Ice Age, about 2 million years ago, the interglacial warm periods last between 5,000 and 10,000 years before a cool down starts to happen. On a side note, I'd like to point out that there weren't all kinds of mass extinctions every time the Earth warmed, which usually happened rapidly, or cooled, which usually happened more slowly. There was a megafaunal mass extinction at the beginning of this interglacial period. I guess Noah just couldn't fit all those big animals on the ark. That was probably caused by us eating our way across the globe. So, global warming itself doesn't necessarily cause mass extinctions. Anyway, back on topic. I'm not saying no cooling happened. In fact, the warmest time since the last glacial period was about 8,000 years ago. But the cooling has been much slower than than the previous interglacials. What could have caused this? Well, evidence is starting to point to us as being the cause. Yep, that's right. It seems like we were warming the Earth before it was cool. The interglacial cycles tend to track with what's called Milankovitch cycles. Basically, these are cyclical changes in the orbit of the Earth that happen over tens of thousands of years. The interglacial warm periods usually correspond to times when there is more sun in the northern hemisphere. Milankovitch cycles don't cause the interglacial cycles directly, but act more like a person pushing someone on a swing. So, these cycles are caused by feedback mechanisms, most likely in the forests of the northern hemisphere, that are being paced by Milankovitch cycles like a metronome. There is lots of land in large forested areas in the northern hemisphere. When they expand, they suck the CO2 out of Earth's atmosphere, causing cooling. The cooling causes glaciers to form, killing the trees, which slowly release the CO2 through decay, increasing the CO2 levels in Earth's atmosphere, in turn causing warming and the expansion of the forests again, and so on. If you look at the historical interglacial cycles, especially if you compare it to the closest match about 400,000 years ago, we should have started to see a major cool down around 2,000 years ago, and we didn't. The only thing different, as far as we can tell, is us. What did we do? Well, as the glaciers receded, instead of being replaced with forests, they were replaced with farms and pastures for grazing. So, all that CO2 that was released during the last glacial maximum couldn't get sequestered back into the biosphere, putting off the major cool down. The cooling did continue though, but more slowly, and the CO2 levels stayed steady until around 500 years ago, when they started to decline. During a glacial period, the CO2 levels are generally between 200 parts per million and 260 parts per million. And during interglacials, it's usually between 280 parts per million and 300 parts per million. At the end of the interglacials, you start to see cooling off when the CO2 levels drop below 280 parts per million. The cooling then accelerates when 260 parts per million is reached, due to the rapid expansion of glaciers. At the beginning of the 19th century, the CO2 levels had fallen below 280 parts per million, which is the slippery slope to the next glacial period. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, almost certainly saving us from a much more chilly fate. In fact, 200 parts per million atmospheric CO2 is right at the limit of what gymnosperms, which includes things like pine trees, can handle before dying, which may be the reason why the glacial periods end once it's reached. The vast forests of gymnosperm trees in the northern hemisphere start to die off in large numbers, halting their ability to sequester more CO2. People wonder why ginkgo trees, which are also gymnosperms, do so well in cities but struggle in the wild. It wouldn't be due to car exhaust, would it? I mean, in their heyday, the atmospheric CO2 was nearly 10 times what it is now. Quite frankly, the Earth may have been on the edge of falling into a prolonged snowball state if the ice age of the last 2 million years had been allowed to continue. Today, the CO2 levels are back to the pre-ice age conditions of about 3 million years ago. Does this mean we're all going to fry when the Earth's temperature jumps? Well, not really. When the Earth is not in an ice age, the poles are substantially warmer, and the equatorial regions are only slightly warmer. While cold areas see huge temperature jumps, Warm areas don't. The polar caps will probably melt though, bringing an end to the ice age we're currently in. That will cause the sea levels to rise, but more land, especially in Canada, Siberia, and yes, Antarctica, may become much warmer and more agriculturally productive. So, the land lost due to the rising seas should be made up for by land regained from the frozen tundras. You may ask, well, why can't the temperatures just stay the same? Well, staying the same never really was an option. The climate changes with or without us. With us, it's getting warmer. That is, as long as we don't meddle with the climate too much in an attempt to fix it. Without us, it gets colder. We're faced with two choices: warmer temperatures with rising sea levels flooding the coastal cities, causing people to move inland, or colder temperatures with advancing glaciers crushing forests and every man-made structure in their path. And oh, with cooling, the coastal cities that weren't crushed by the glaciers would still be destroyed, at least economically, since the ocean levels would drop, leaving them far from the ocean. There is no middle-of-the-road choice here. Which would you pick? If you like this video, please press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon, link in the description. The more people who support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until the next time, have a great week.